covering the Utes better than anyone else. This is Utes Insider Steve Bartle of KSLSports.com on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back, everybody. JJ and Alex, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Alex Curie, Jeremiah Jensen. We are down here in Linden at Trucordia at their beautiful offices. Tonight, we're going to be welcoming the KSL Sports and the KSL Sports Zone Player of the Week Awards recipients down here in Utah County. And joining us on the program right now, he is our Ute Insider for KSLSports.com. The news was made official. I know it wasn't a total shock to see Devon Dampier signing with the Utes, Steve, but how big of a pickup is it out of the transfer portal to get one of the most productive quarterbacks in college football up on the hill?
It was a big one for Utah. This obviously, with Utah going through a bit of a reset, a bit of a makeover. I shouldn't say a complete makeover, essentially. This offseason with the new offensive coordinator and Jason Beck, to get the quarterback that he coached last year, that's pretty big. So, now Utah has a quarterback with valuable experience under Beck in that offense, and it's going to allow them to move forward with a pretty exciting piece to highlight and to talk about. And with Devon Dampier, he comes from Arizona. He's a pretty popular guy. He knows a lot of players from the area. He played at two really good programs in Phoenix, and that's going to be beneficial for Utah as well. Hopefully, in the sense of bringing others to join him at Utah this offseason. So this was a big one for Utah in a number of different ways, and it's good that they got it done, got it announced early, so that they can now move forward the rest of the portal cycle with him, him in the class.
It's huge news today for Utah, badly needed for this program, for the fans, a huge positive step forward. This obviously he's a difference maker. What he did at New Mexico is pretty impressive. Let's dig into that, Steve. What made him so special at New Mexico, and how do you think that will translate now to the P4 level?
Yeah, he was dynamic through the air, on the ground. He finished with over 2,700 passing yards and almost 1,200 rushing yards. He ran for 19 touchdowns. That's an absurd number, 19 touchdowns, right? Like, think of Tavion Thomas a couple years ago when he was just running his way to the end zone seemingly multiple times a game. He ended up with, 22, 23, something like that season. So Dampier finished with 19 last year. Obviously 12 touchdowns through the air and 12 interceptions. There's work to do as a passer. But I think what this gives Utah is a guy that is going to help you move the chains and move the offense and be productive in both phases of the game. He's going to allow you to be he gives you a piece that can allow the offense to be efficient and also explosive. I think what's really exciting is that, Dampier's pretty rough around the edges. He's got to round out his game, but there's a lot of potential with him as a passer. According to Pro Football Focus, they have this stat that they measure. It's called big time throws. It's essentially, any sort of throw that has excellent ball location and timing, typically into tight windows. So the sort of throws that get you out of your seat, right? Like, that's the sort of throw we're talking about. Dampier registered 22 big time throws in college football, which is the 10th most among 96 qualified quarterbacks. So that's pretty significant. And it's not just that New Mexico was throwing the ball a lot. It's not just a product of high volume. His 5.1% big-time throw rate was the 20th highest rate among those same 96 quarterbacks. So, there's obviously talent that speaks to his talent level. Obviously, he needs to cut down on the interceptions. But what's interesting about that is he actually had one of the lower turnover-worthy play rates, which is another pro football focused stat. He finished, what did he finish? 16th lowest in that metric among those same 96 quarterbacks. So you're getting a guy, when you look at the raw numbers, you see the 12 interceptions, you see the 57.9% completion percentage, and you just think, oh, this guy, he's an athlete first, quarterback second, but there's actually a lot of potential here as a passer. Obviously, his dynamic athletic ability, that's going to be key. And what's interesting there is he converted 72 first downs on the ground as a rusher, which is actually let me see here, I wrote it down, the 15th most among all quarterbacks and running backs. So he converted 72 first downs on the ground, and again, he finds a way to impact games positively. And I think coming to Utah and having that in place now under Beck, moving into year 2 in the same offense for him, even though it's a different location, I think is big for both Utah and for Dampier to help him, along his progression.
This was when you see these announcements, then you start to look around and go, okay, what does the rest of this do to the class that's out there that they're trying to re-recruit? You think of Isaac Wilson. Is that a guy that now this is the if you're hoping that he comes back to Utah, an announcement like this makes it actually a lot less likely? Or is there some version of Isaac coming back and wanting to be a part of this program with Dampier coming to Utah, who's going to have 2 years of eligibility left?
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting. I had heard that Isaac Wilson actually had the door open to him to return despite him leaving or despite him entering the portal, which is something as we've covered Utah over the years, that door open to return hasn't been open to everybody. And so I think that was pretty telling. But I think with Dampier being a quarterback that has 2 seasons of eligibility remaining, that is actually something that's not going to help Utah's case in bringing Isaac Wilson back. I think Isaac is, just talking to sources, he was content in bringing, in the sense of sitting for a year next year potentially if Utah brought in a veteran quarterback that could come in and kind of take the reins for a year. But the 2 years, just given kind of the volatility of the quarterback position in college football, having a quarterback with multiple seasons of eligibility potentially being in place, for 2 seasons, it sounds like that's going to be a little bit too much for Isaac Wilson and his camp to accept it. So it probably impacts Wilson's potential to return for Utah, but with Utah, they're going to continue to look for somebody else to bring in behind Dampier as well. I think they're going to be pretty locked in on bringing in a backup quarterback from the transfer portal as well. They have the 2 quarterback signees in the class in Jamarian Ficklin and Wyatt Becker, but I think Utah also wants to bring in another quarterback, potentially, recruiting Brandon Rose back to the program as well. We'll see what happens, but I do think Utah wants to bring in another quarterback with Dampier as well.
You mentioned the importance of locking in Dampier early so they could go out and finalize this roster. What's next for Utah? Do they have the interest in more New Mexico players that stood out last year? That offense put up a lot of big numbers. What's the next big thing that they're looking for? What needs do they need to address here now that they've got Dampier locked in?
Yeah, so the next couple of steps for Utah is going to be the skill positions, the running back and receiver positions. You can flip a coin at essentially which one needs help most. I think if you're looking at both position groups, there's some exciting young talents, but there's not a lot of depth, at either position. At running back, you've got Mike Mitchell still in the program. You're bringing in 2 exciting freshmen in the class in Racing Guillory and Daniel Bray. Similarly with receiver, you got a couple of promising pieces in Zacharias Williams and Dadrian Zipper, as well as a handful of freshmen coming in. Those are the 2 positions that I think Utah is going to work the hardest on, in the portal moving forward. And I think what'll be interesting is you look at New Mexico, they had a running back in Eli Sanders who was pretty dynamic, a nice compliment to Devon Dampier. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of relationships that Eli Sanders, again, another product of the Phoenix area. He's going to be a guy that I think everybody looks at. But, Utah's they're going to, look across the country for help at running back. And just looking at the market, a guy like Wayshawn Parker out of Washington State, I know is somebody that they have a lot of interest in. He's a guy that, Washington State last year ran for about 800 yards and a handful of touchdowns as a freshman, which is exciting. He's going to be a priority. Quentin Joyner out of USC, showed some flashes for the Trojans last year. He's a little bit bigger at 6 foot, 215 pounds. He's going to be another running back. And I think that's sort of the back that Utah is looking for is, bigger back, more dynamic back, and that sort of thing. At receiver, there's a couple of New Mexico receivers that hit the portal, Luke Wysong, Ryan Davis, and Caleb Medford. Those are going to be guys to keep at the top of your watch list if you like to follow this stuff pretty closely. But there's going to be a lot of other receivers that there's not going to be. There are a lot of other receivers that Utah is currently involved with. Keep an eye on Joseph Williams from Tulsa, who entered the portal after a true freshman All-American campaign at Tulsa. I think he finished with just shy of 600 yards. He's going to be a guy to keep an eye on. D.T. Sheffield out of North Texas is another productive receiver. He's a veteran that I think has 1 year left remaining. He's eyeing a visit to Utah potentially next week. And then there are a couple other receivers that Utah is going to be looking at. And then, moving forward on the other side of the ball, defensively, Utah is going to have to address the cornerback position. We've seen a number of offers go out to that side, to that position today and yesterday as well. So, Utah is going to move forward pretty determined to add to those groups, and we'll see what comes.
Cam Calhoun jumping into the transfer portal was also one of those things we didn't expect because he had tweeted out already the Utah man am I. And, we've seen a lot of people get burned in the transfer portal, but, on the one hand, you get grumpy about guys and their loyalties and things. I just don't do it anymore just because – these guys go into the transfer portal and they're going to do their own thing, fine, whatever. But replacing that high value guy who was going to likely be a starter for the rest of his career at Utah, that's a tough one for that defense because you just thought he was going to be one of these solid pieces that's going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's just kind of a sign of the times. College football right now is, one day you're feeling good about something, the very next day, right, it can all change. And that's just sort of the issues here with college football. And look, like obviously with Cam Calhoun entering the portal, it's tough for Utah, right? This is something that, you can look at Utah as sort of the victim here. But this is also something that Utah has benefited from themselves, in past cycles. So this is just kind of the nature of the business. And I think that's kind of the biggest issue right now is there's no finish line. There's no safe space. There's no exhale, right? Like, okay, we've got them signed. It's over. It's done. We don't have to worry about them anymore. We've agreed to a deal. We don't have to worry about it. It's constantly – you're recruiting your own guys constantly. Even when you've agreed to terms, there's always the chance that somebody else can come in with a higher number in terms of compensation for these guys. And that is kind of the biggest issue right now in college football is just this need to constantly re-recruit and then re-recruit the same guys.
Right.
It's taking up a lot of time, and you're going to see, I think, adjustments and changes come. I don't know how soon, but obviously with the revenue sharing and what that's going to bring, it's only a matter of time before we see collective bargaining and this turn more and more into professional sports, which I think is a good thing given the fact that there already is money in it. We know what it is. Don't call it pay for play, but that's exactly what it is. It's just a matter of time before we get more regulation, which is absolutely necessary because this is the sort of stuff and headache that is driving a lot of these coaches out of the game.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to be a coach right now, especially if you're a longtime coach that used to do things the old way. But Kyle Whittingham has decided that he wants to take on the challenge for at least one more season, and the staff's back, and that's exciting for Utah. And they are, in my opinion, with that defense coming back for the most part, obviously Calhoun's a loss, but I'm sure they'll fill that gap. If you pair a really good dynamic offense with this defense, Utah will bounce back nicely next year. So Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley obviously believe that Jason Beck would be able to deliver that. Why is he the right fit for that job? Why do they believe he can do that for them?
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to make clear of, is that this was Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley's, both of them signed off on Jason Beck, and I think that's important to recognize here. And I think with Jason Beck, you look at that offense and what they were able to do at New Mexico. I think the most encouraging thing that you can take away from what New Mexico did with that offense was that, against 3 Power 5, Power 4 programs in Arizona, Auburn, and Washington State, the offense averaged 32 points per game, 484 yards per game, and a darn near even split, 50-50 split of 242 yards rushing, 241 yards throwing. And I think, when you consider what New Mexico, the talent deficit that they're in against those teams, Arizona, Washington State, and Auburn, they were able to still produce, offensively. And I think when you look at some of the offensive scheme and what they like to do, it's built around the run, obviously with Devon Dampier, but it creates opportunities to be efficient. I shouldn't say creates opportunities, but it allows the offense to be efficient. That's what it's built on, is efficiency, given the ability to run the ball as efficiently as they do, but also create explosive opportunities, which again is highlighted by Devon Dampier's 22 big-time throws. And so I think that is what's exciting. And with Beck, he's got a good track record. He's got a good history. A lot of people that have worked with him have raved about his ability to coach and to develop. And I think that's a key thing for Utah moving forward. Andy Ludwig was a brilliant mind, a brilliant coach, a brilliant offensive coordinator when he had the guys that were able to execute that offense, that had the time in the offense. I think Beck is different in the sense that he can develop a little bit better. And I think that's so important for Utah moving forward, especially whenever Morgan Scalley takes over. You're going to need coaches that are genuinely good at developing and getting the most out of them, and just giving kind of the changes in the passing game and the modern game and all that. I think Beck is a really good hire given his background. You look at some of the guys he's worked with at Virginia and elsewhere, a lot of good numbers. And I think those are kind of the key things for Utah, why they liked Beck.
He's Steve Bartle. He's our Utes Insider for KSLSports.com and does a phenomenal job covering the Utes, of course, for us here on the station and on KSLSports.com. You can read his byline there. Anything that breaks, Steve's going to be right there giving you the breakdown of it. So we appreciate you taking time every week with us here, Steve, and giving us a little bit of some insight here. We appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no doubt. Appreciate you, fellas.
There you go. Lots of work. Steve thought maybe we'd be heading into the Christmas break, a little bit of a
no.
Steve's
going to be busy.
Hey, they're not in the Rose Bowl they're not in the Rose Bowl for the first time, in a minute. So
he mentioned the running back at New Mexico, Eli Sanders, is in the portal,
and
obviously the decision by Devon Dampier has the attention of Eli Sanders.
Eli Sanders,
a bunch of googly eyes on Twitter.
Don't you love he has big eye emojis on there?
Oh, that must mean something.
What's that kid saying with his big eye emojis?
Oh,
let's break it down.
Yeah,
next.
Eli had no idea Devon was coming to Utah. Surprise, surprise.
It's like, wow, eyeball.
And then a day from now, Eli Sanders coming to Utah. Whoa, what a surprise.
Come on.